The first thing I noticed was how quiet the car felt. Not peaceful, not calm, just wrong. I was sitting in the passenger seat of my husband's Mercedes, waiting for my daughter to finish her dance class, when she asked if she could listen to music. Her iPhone was dead, so I leaned over to check the side compartment for a charger. That was all I meant to do. Something simple, something harmless. Instead, my fingers touched plastic. Thin, light, out of place. I pulled it out without thinking. A white stick, 2 lines. Positive. For a second, my brain refused to catch up. I stared at it like it belonged to another life, another woman, another mistake. I was not pregnant. I hadn't been pregnant in years. No one in our house was. The car suddenly felt too small. The air pressed against my chest. Outside, I could see other parents laughing, unscrolling on their phones, living normal lives, while mine cracked open silently in a parking lot. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I didn't scream, didn't shake, didn't call my husband to demand answers. I just sat there, holding the test between my fingers, realizing something much worse than betrayal. He hadn't even tried to hide it. That meant he didn't think I'd ever find it. Or worse, he didn't think it would matter if I did. I slipped the test back where it was and closed the compartment carefully, like returning a weapon to its place. When my daughter climbed into the back seat, smiling and out of breath, I smiled back. I asked about her class. I buckled her seatbelt. I drove home like nothing had changed. That night, I watched my husband laugh at the dinner table, telling a story from work, completely at ease. I studied his face, by his hands, the man I had built a life around. And in that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. If I confronted him now, I would lose. So I decided not to confront him at all. I decided to celebrate instead. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge doesn't begin with anger. It begins with a smile no one understands yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside Nathan, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, memorizing how easily he rested, while my mind ran in circles. The ceiling fan spun above us, slicing the darkness into slow, repeating shadows. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Every thought felt heavier. I kept replaying the moment in the car, the weight of the test in my hand, the way I hadn't dropped it, the way I hadn't gasped. That scared me more than the discovery itself. Because denial wasn't an option anymore. I knew something else too. Something most people don't realize until it's too late. The first person to speak rarely wins. The one who asks questions first is the one who gives away their power. And right now, Nathan had everything. The house was in his name. Most of our savings were tied to his accounts. Even my work came through connections he'd introduced me to over the years. If I confronted him now, he could spin any story he wanted. He could say it was a mistake, a prank, someone else's. He could accuse me of being paranoid, emotional, unstable, and people would believe him. They always believed the calm one, the successful one, the man who never raised his voice. So the next morning, I acted normal. I packed Emma's lunch. I reminded Nathan about a meeting he'd almost forgotten. I kissed him goodbye at the door and watched him walk away, confident and untouched. When the house was finally quiet, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink. I opened my laptop. I didn't search for proof of an affair. That would leave a trail. Instead, I started looking at our life the way a stranger would. Bank statements, calendar patterns, late meetings that never showed up on official schedules, expense charges that didn't quite add up. Nothing obvious, nothing I could use. And that was the problem. Whatever was happening, Nathan had planned it carefully, which meant the pregnancy test wasn't an accident. It was a crack in his armor, and I had been lucky enough to see it. That afternoon, when he texted to say he'd be home late again, I replied with a heart emoji. I hated myself for how convincing it looked. But deep down, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to beg for the truth. I was going to let him reveal it himself. And when he did, it wouldn't be behind closed doors. It would be where everyone could see. Because the moment I chose silence, I wasn't giving up. I was setting a trap he couldn't see yet. By the end of the week, I understood something I had never fully admitted to myself before. The house I lived in wasn't my territory. It was beautiful. Yes, wide windows, soft lighting, carefully chosen furniture that I'd helped design. But it was never truly mine. Every major decision had Nathan's signature on it. Every document. Every account. I moved through those rooms the way a guest learns not to touch anything too valuable. Friday night, we had dinner with his parents. I set the table the way his mother liked it. The good plates, the matching napkins. I wore the sweater Nathan once told me made me look put together, but not trying too hard. Small rules I had learned over years of marriage, rules that kept the peace. Conversation flowed easily at first. Work, Emma's school, a new restaurant opening in Manhattan. Nathan was charming, attentive, the perfect son-in-law. When his mother laughed at one of his jokes, she reached for his arm, not mine. Then, without looking at me, she said, "Lauren, have you thought about doing something more stable?" The word landed softly, but it carried weight. "You've been freelancing for years," she continued. "At some point, a woman should prioritize the family instead of chasing projects that come and go." I opened my mouth to answer, but Nathan spoke first. She enjoys what she does," he said calmly. "It keeps her busy. Busy, not fulfilled, not accomplished, just occupied." I felt myself shrink back into my chair, the way I'd learned to do when correcting him would only make things worse. I watched his father nod in agreement. I watched his mother smile like the conversation was settled. Emma sat beside me, swinging her legs under the table. She leaned over and whispered, "Mom, you help people make their businesses pretty. That's important." Her voice was small, but it cut through the room. Nathan cleared his throat. His mother changed the subject. No one acknowledged what my daughter had said. After dinner, as I loaded dishes into the dishwasher, I caught my reflection in the stainless steel door. I looked calm, composed, invisible. That was when it became painfully clear. If I accused Nathan now, this house would close ranks against me. I would be the unstable wife, the ungrateful one, the woman who imagined problems where none existed. And I finally understood the true risk. It wasn't losing my marriage, it was losing my voice. So I stayed quiet, and I let them believe I was exactly who they thought I was. Because sometimes, the safest place to hide is inside the role they've already written for you. I didn't plan to meet her. That was the part that made it feel less like coincidence, and more like a warning I was meant to receive. I had gone into the city to drop off signed paperwork at Nathan's office, something he asked me to do because it was on my way anyway. His building rose over Park Avenue, all glass and steel, the kind of place that made people stand a little straighter when they walked inside. I told myself it was just another errand. In and out. The elevator doors opened on his floor, and that was when I saw her. She stepped out at the same time I did, heels clicking softly against the marble. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with carefully styled hair and a blazer that fit too perfectly to be an afterthought. She moved like someone who belonged there, like someone who had already imagined herself staying. Our eyes met for half a second. She didn't look away. That alone told me everything. Most women, when caught in an unexpected moment, show something. Panic, guilt, curiosity. But her expression was calm, almost patient, as if she had been expecting this meeting and was simply waiting for me to catch up. "Lauren," she said, before I could introduce myself. I stopped walking. Yes?" "I'm Brooke," she replied smoothly. "Nathan mentioned you." Of course he had. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was measured, controlled. The smile of someone who believes they're winning, but doesn't need to prove it yet. I noticed then how one hand rested unconsciously against her lower stomach, not protectively, just familiarly. A habit. A secret she was already used to carrying. "Well," I said quietly, "it's nice to finally put a face to the name." Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. Surprise, quickly masked. "I hope we'll meet again," she said, "under happier circumstances." The implication hung between us, sharp and deliberate. As she walked away, I realized she hadn't asked how I was. She hadn't asked about my daughter. She hadn't shown any curiosity about the life I shared with the man she was clearly entangled with. She already knew where she thought she fit into that story. Standing alone in the hallway, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not with fear, but with understanding. This wasn't an affair born of recklessness. It was calculated, planned. And for the first time, I understood the scale of what I was up against. She wasn't afraid of me, which meant she believed I was already losing. And that was the moment I decided I would let her think that. For now. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind that usually felt slow and harmless. Emma was sitting at the kitchen island, coloring quietly while I cleaned up breakfast. Sunlight spilled across the floor, catching the dust in the air, turning everything soft. For a moment, I almost believed I had imagined the tension of the past week. Almost. "Mom," she said suddenly, not looking up from her paper. "Yes, sweetheart. Why does Daddy's car smell different sometimes?" My hands froze around the dish towel. I kept my voice steady. "Different how?" She shrugged, the way children do when they don't realize they're holding something important. "Like flowers. Not your perfume, and not the soap he uses." I turned slowly, leaning against the counter so she wouldn't see the shift in my face. "When did you notice that?" She thought for a moment. "A lot. Mostly when he picks me up after work. One time I asked him, and he said it was from the office." "From the office." I nodded, as if that explanation made sense. "Okay," I said gently. "Thank you for telling me." Emma went back to coloring, already done with the subject. For her, it was just an observation, a detail filed away and released. For me, it was confirmation I hadn't asked for. Fine. Later that afternoon, Nathan tossed me his car keys and asked if I could grab something he'd left inside. The weight of the metal felt heavier than it should have. I walked into the garage alone and opened the driver's door. The scent hit me immediately. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was expensive, sweet, and undeniably feminine. It lingered in the leather seats, clung to the air like it belonged there. I closed my eyes. This time, I didn't feel shock. I felt something colder, something steadier. Because this wasn't just my discovery anymore. It wasn't a secret hidden in a compartment. My daughter had noticed, and that changed everything. I wiped the dashboard with a tissue before handing the keys back, erasing evidence that wasn't meant to be erased yet. Nathan thanked me without looking up from his phone. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "I like when it's just us." "So do I," said, pressing my lips to her hair. And in that quiet moment, my resolve hardened. Whatever I did next, it couldn't explode recklessly. It couldn't turn into shouting or scenes or chaos that would pull her into the wreckage. This wasn't about catching Nathan anymore. It was about protecting my child from growing up inside a lie. And I knew then, I would be careful, but I would not be kind. Because when the truth reaches a child first, silence stops being an option. The realization didn't come all at once. It settled in slowly, like fog rolling in after sunset. Soft enough to ignore at first, but thick enough to blind you if you kept walking. I noticed it in the smallest details, in the way Nathan answered questions without really answering them, and how easily he redirected conversations when money or plans came up. One evening, while he was in the shower, I opened our shared laptop, not to spy, not to dig through messages. I already knew better than that. Anything obvious would be locked down, deleted, protected. I was looking for something else. Structure. I pulled up our mortgage documents, his name alone. I checked the investment accounts we'd discussed as ours, his name again. Even the emergency savings, funds I thought we'd built together, were technically under his control. I hadn't noticed before because I trusted him. Because trust makes you lazy in places where you should be alert. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with clarity. If I confronted him, he could freeze me out financially before I ever packed a bag. If I accused him without proof, he could paint me as unstable, emotional, vindictive. And in a world that already viewed me as the wife who stayed home, that narrative would stick. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. This wasn't just an affair, it was a setup. Nathan hadn't simply cheated, he had positioned himself carefully, quietly, over years. He had made sure that if anything ever went wrong, he would be the one standing on solid ground while I scrambled to explain myself. That night at dinner, he casually mentioned how stressful his job had been lately, how much responsibility he carried. His parents nodded sympathetically. No one asked how I was managing. No one ever did. I smiled and cleared the plates. In the bathroom later, I locked the door and pressed my hands against the counter, grounding myself. I wasn't trapped because I was weak. I was trapped because I had trusted the wrong person in a system that rewarded his confidence and punished my silence. But silence could be strategic. If I played this wrong, I would lose my home, my child, and my credibility all at once. If I played it right, the truth wouldn't need my voice to be heard. That was when I understood the real danger. The danger wasn't Nathan leaving me. It was Nathan believing I could never leave him. And in that misunderstanding, he had made his first mistake. Because the moment I saw the trap clearly, I stopped being caught in it and started planning my way out. The idea didn't come to me in a flash of inspiration. It arrived quietly, done the way real decisions do, after fear had burned itself out and left something colder behind. I was folding laundry when it happened. Emma's socks in neat pairs, Nathan's shirts pressed flat, their cuffs still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. A normal moment in a normal house, the kind of life I had worked hard to maintain. And that was when it struck me. Leaving would be the obvious move. That's what everyone expects the betrayed wife to do. Pack a bag, cry to friends, demand answers, walk out in the middle of the night with dignity and heartbreak wrapped together. And that was exactly why I couldn't do it. If I left now, Nathan would control the story. He would call it a misunderstanding. He would tell his family I was overwhelmed, emotional, dramatic, and he would take his time reshaping the truth into something that made him look reasonable and me look unstable. And Brooke would step neatly into the space I abandoned. So I made a decision that terrified me more than leaving ever could. I stayed. I stayed and played my role better than I ever had before. I asked Nathan about his day. I laughed at his jokes. I let him believe his life was intact. I watched him relax into that belief, watched the tension slip from his shoulders as the days passed. He thought he had escaped consequences. That illusion was my leverage. At night, when the house was quiet, I wrote things down. Dates, times, small comments that didn't mean anything on their own. I wasn't collecting proof. I was building context, a map, something that would make sense later, when the truth surfaced on its own. Because I wasn't going to expose him privately. I wasn't going to beg for honesty behind closed doors, where he could deny everything and call me cruel. I was going to give him exactly what he thought he wanted. Normalcy, safety, time. And in that time, I would choose the moment, the place, the audience. The thought made my stomach twist, not with doubt, but with the weight of what it required. Staying meant enduring his touch, his casual affection, his lies spoken inches from my face. It meant walking through fire without letting the smoke show, but it also meant control. And for the first time since I found the pregnancy test, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. Because the most dangerous thing a man can believe is that the woman beside him has already surrendered, when she's actually waiting. The invitation was my first visible move. I waited 3 days before mentioning it, long enough for the idea to sound spontaneous instead of strategic. We were in the living room, Emma sprawled on the rug with her homework, Nathan scrolling through emails on his phone. The scene felt ordinary, which was exactly what I needed. I was thinking, I said lightly, folding my hands in my lap. It's been a while since we did something with the whole family. Everyone's been so busy lately. Nathan looked up, distracted. Like what? Dinner, I replied. Nothing dramatic, just a small celebration. My parents, yours, a few people from work, a gratitude night. The word celebration caught his attention. I saw it in the slight lift of his eyebrows. For what? He asked. I smiled. For us. For everything we've built. We don't really stop and acknowledge that anymore. He studied my face, searching for something I wasn't giving him. Doubt, suspicion, tension. He found none. What he saw was the version of me he was most comfortable with. The agreeable wife, calm and composed, still invested. That could be nice, he said finally. Where were you thinking? I had already decided. There's a restaurant in Manhattan you like, I said. Private room, good lighting, enough space so it doesn't feel crowded. He nodded slowly. Yeah, that works. I didn't rush to send the invitations. I waited another day, then mentioned casually that I'd invited a few people from his office too. Just colleagues, I added. People you work closely with. Nathan hesitated, then shrugged. Sure. Why not? That was the moment I knew he felt safe. I typed out the invitations that night, my fingers steady as I added names. His parents. Mine. A few business associates. And then, without pause, I included Brooke. I listed her as part of Nathan's team. Neutral. Professional. Impossible to object to without raising questions he didn't want asked. When I showed him the guest list, his eyes flicked over her name for less than a second. He didn't comment. That silence told me everything. By inviting her, I wasn't confronting the truth. I was placing it carefully in the room where it could no longer hide. I wasn't forcing a confession. I was creating a stage. As I closed my laptop, my hands finally trembled. Not with fear, but with anticipation. The invitations were sent. The date was set. And the clock started ticking for everyone involved. Because once the audience is chosen, the truth always knows when to arrive. The night of the dinner arrived wrapped in elegance. Manhattan glowed the way it always did when money and ambition shared the same streets. The restaurant Nathan loved sat above the noise, tucked into a building where the elevators moved silently, and the host greeted guests by name. A private room had been prepared just for us, separated from the rest of the dining floor by frosted glass that blurred faces, but not sound. Control without isolation. Visibility without chaos. Exactly what I wanted. I arrived early with Emma. She wore the navy dress she liked because it made her feel grown up. I brushed her hair carefully, my hands steady, my voice calm, as I reminded her to stay close to me. She nodded, sensing that tonight mattered, even if she didn't fully understand why. Nathan arrived next, confident and relaxed, adjusting his cufflinks, as if this dinner were nothing more than another box checked in a busy week. He kissed my cheek and thanked me for organizing everything. His gratitude felt rehearsed, but I accepted it with a smile. Guests filtered in one by one. His parents. Mine. A few familiar faces from his firm. Laughter filled the room, soft and polite, bouncing off crystal glasses and white tablecloths. Nathan moved easily among them, shaking hands, telling stories, playing the role he'd perfected over years. Then Brooke arrived. She was punctual, calm, dressed impeccably, like someone who had thought carefully about how she would be seen tonight. When she spotted Nathan, her expression flickered, just for a second, before settling into professional ease. She greeted me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "Of course," I replied. "You're part of the team." The way she glanced at Nathan after that told me she understood the double meaning. Dinner began. Wine was poured. Plates were served. Conversations overlapped and separated like waves, everyone staying comfortably within the boundaries of small talk. I watched Nathan relax further as the evening progressed, his shoulders loosening, his laughter growing louder. He believed this night belonged to him. Across the table, Brooke barely touched her food. Her hand rested on the table, fingers tapping lightly against the linen. Not nervous, anticipatory, as if she were waiting for something she believed would inevitably arrive. I took it all in, the lighting, the seating, the way no one could leave without passing through the center of the room. Every element mattered. Every witness was intentional. As I folded my napkin neatly on my lap, I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle into place. This wasn't confrontation. was positioning. And as dessert menus were placed in front of us, I knew the room was exactly where it needed to be. Because power doesn't announce itself, it arranges the moment and waits. Dessert menus rested unopened on the table. That was my cue. I stood slowly, lifting my glass just enough for the movement to be noticed. The conversations around us faded, one by one, as people realized I was about to speak. Nathan turned toward me with a surprised smile, the kind reserved for moments he believed were safe. "Before we end the night," I said, my voice steady, warm, practiced. I just want to say how grateful I am." A few nods, soft smiles. His mother leaned back, attentive. "This family has meant everything to me," I continued. "We've built a life together. We've shared responsibilities, sacrifices, and so many milestones." Nathan reached for his glass, relaxed. "And lately," I added, pausing just long enough, "I've realized how important honesty and accountability are, especially when children are involved." The room stilled. I turned slightly toward Nathan, meeting his eyes for the first time all evening. He looked confused, but not alarmed. Not yet. "So tonight," I said gently, lifting my glass higher, "I want to congratulate my husband on becoming a father again." The silence hit like a physical force. Nathan froze. His glass hovered midair, then lowered slowly back to the table. Across from us, Brooke's fork slipped from her fingers, clattering against the plate. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered my name. I didn't look away. "Congratulations," I repeated, calm, composed. It must be a lot to process, for all of us. Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it. His face drained of color as he realized what had just happened. Not privately, not quietly, but here, in front of everyone who mattered to him. I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, his voice too loud, too sharp. That was when Emma spoke. She looked from Nathan to me, her brow furrowed in innocent confusion. "Mom," she asked softly, "is this about the baby Daddy said would live somewhere else?" The room broke. Chairs scraped. Conversations exploded. Nathan's mother stared at him in disbelief. His father stood abruptly, demanding answers. Brooke pushed her chair back, shaking, eyes wide with the realization that this moment was never meant to be hers. Nathan reached for my arm. I stepped back. "I didn't plan this to hurt anyone," I said quietly. "I planned it so the truth wouldn't have anywhere left to hide." I set my glass down untouched. Then I took my daughter's hand and walked away. Because when the truth is spoken calmly, it echoes louder than any accusation ever could. The room didn't erupt right away. That was the strangest part. For a few seconds after Emma spoke, everything froze in a way I had never witnessed before. Not loud chaos, not shouting, just a heavy, suspended silence, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see who would move first. Nathan was still standing. His hand hovered where my arm had been a moment earlier, fingers slightly curled, as if his body hadn't yet accepted that I'd stepped away. His mouth opened again, but this time no sound came out. Whatever explanation he had rehearsed for years had no place to land. Brooke looked around the table, panic finally breaking through her composure. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for an ally, a lifeline, someone who would soften what had just happened. No one did. Nathan's mother was the first to speak, though her voice sounded unfamiliar, thinner than before. "Nathan," she said slowly, "what is she talking about?" He swallowed hard. "This is a misunderstanding," he replied, too quickly. "Lauren's upset. She's jumping to conclusions." I didn't respond. I watched instead as his father pushed his chair back and stood, his face tight with a disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "Is there a child involved or not?" he asked flatly. Nathan hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any confession. Brooke's chair scraped sharply against the floor as she stood. "I think I should go," she said, her voice shaking despite her effort to control it. No one stopped her. No one looked at her. She wasn't the focus anymore. Nathan was. Conversations erupted all at once after that. Accusations, questions, shocked whispers. Emma clutched my hand tightly, her small fingers cold against mine. I knelt beside her, brushing her hair back, lowering my voice so only she could hear me. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "I promise." She nodded, trusting me completely. Behind us, Nathan was trying to speak over the noise, trying to regain control of a room that no longer belonged to him. His words blurred together. Explanations without structure, excuses without conviction. I stood, guiding Emma toward the door. No one tried to stop us. As we walked out, I felt something unexpected settle over me. Not triumph, not relief, certainty. Whatever happened next, lawyers, conversations, consequences, it would unfold without me having to fight to be believed. The truth had already done its work. And once it's seen by everyone, it can never be taken back. We didn't go far at first. I stopped just outside the restaurant, the city noise rushing back in like a wave that reminded me the world was still moving. Emma stood close to me, her small hand wrapped tightly around mine. Her eyes were wide, not frightened, but searching, as if she sensed something important had just shifted and was trying to understand where she fit inside it. "Mom," she said quietly, "did I say something bad?" I crouched down immediately, meeting her at eye level. "No," I said without hesitation. "You told the truth, and the truth is never bad." She studied my face, the way children do when they are deciding whether to trust the answer or ask again. Then she nodded, satisfied, and leaned into me. I held her there longer than necessary, grounding both of us. Behind us, the restaurant doors opened. Nathan stepped outside, his jacket half buttoned, his expression strained in a way I had never seen before. The confidence he carried so easily in public had cracked, leaving something raw and unsteady beneath it. "Lauren," he said, lowering his voice, "you didn't have to do that." I stood slowly, placing myself between him and Emma without thinking. "I didn't make you say anything," I replied. "I didn't even accuse you. I congratulated you." His jaw tightened. "You embarrassed me." I almost laughed at the simplicity of it. "No," I said calmly. "You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped protecting you from it." He looked down at Emma, then away, as if unsure how to address her presence now that she wasn't invisible anymore. "She shouldn't have heard that," he muttered. "She already knew something was wrong," I answered. "Children always do." For a moment, he seemed like he might argue. Instead, his shoulders sagged. The silence between us stretched, heavy but honest. "I can explain," he finally said. I shook my head. "Not tonight. And not to me." Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Can we go home?" she asked softly. I looked at Nathan one last time. "This is what accountability feels like," I told him. "Well, get used to it." Then I turned away, guiding my daughter toward the waiting car. As I buckled her in, I realized something profound. The truth hadn't come from me. It had come through a child who had nothing to gain and nothing to hide. And that made it impossible to dismiss. Because when innocence speaks, even the strongest lies start to fall apart. The fallout didn't wait until morning. By the time we reached home, my phone was already vibrating with messages I didn't open. Nathan's name flashed across the screen more than once. His mother called, then his father. I silenced the phone and focused on getting Emma settled, helping her change into pajamas, reading the same bedtime story she'd loved since she was 5. She fell asleep quickly, worn out by emotions she couldn't yet name. I sat beside her bed for a long time after, listening to her breathing, letting the quiet stitch me back together. Downstairs, the house felt hollow. Nathan didn't come home that night. Instead, the consequences began assembling themselves without my involvement. His parents demanded answers. His colleagues, who had witnessed the dinner, started talking. Not gossip, concern, questions about judgment, about integrity, about whether a man who hid a child could be trusted with other people's money. By morning, the narrative had shifted in a way Nathan could no longer control. When he finally walked through the door just after sunrise, he looked older. Not tired, diminished. His suit was wrinkled, his confidence nowhere to be found. He stood in the doorway like a guest unsure of his welcome. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't invite him to sit. "About what?" I asked evenly. He ran a hand through his hair. My firm put me on temporary leave. They said they need to review the situation. I nodded once. That's usually what happens when trust becomes a question. His eyes snapped up. You did this? I met his gaze without flinching. No, I stopped preventing it. He exhaled sharply, pacing the room. Brooke's not answering her phone. Her department moved her to another office. They don't want complications. For the first time, I heard fear in his voice. Real fear. And the baby? I asked quietly. He froze. That pause told me everything. I don't know, he admitted. She thought I would leave you. She thought this dinner meant. He stopped himself. I finally spoke the words he'd been avoiding. You promised her a future that didn't exist. He looked at me then. Really looked. And something in his expression broke. I never thought you'd do this, he said. I picked up my coffee mug, hand steady. That's because you never thought I could. Outside, the sun rose over the city, bright and indifferent. And in that light, Nathan Whitmore began to understand what losing control actually felt like, because when the illusion collapses, there's nothing left to hide behind. I didn't leave the house immediately. That surprised Nathan. He seemed to expect slammed doors, packed suitcases, chaos. Instead, I moved through the morning with quiet intention. I made Emma breakfast. I walked her to school. I waved as she joined her friends, her world still intact, still safe. Only after that did I return home and sit across from him at the kitchen table. I'm taking Emma tonight, I said. She'll stay with me. He nodded too quickly. Of course. I noticed then how small he looked in that chair. The man who once filled rooms now avoided eye contact, his confidence replaced by calculation. He wanted to know what I would do next. That uncertainty was new for him. I'm not taking the house, I continued calmly. Not yet. And I'm not fighting you in front of her. He exhaled, relieved. Lauren, thank you. I swear, I'll make this right. I met his eyes. You don't get to make this right. You only get to live with what you chose. I packed lightly, a week's worth of clothes, Emma's school bag, her favorite sweater. I didn't take anything that felt like it belonged to a version of my life that no longer existed. As I closed the suitcase, Nathan stood in the doorway, watching me with a mixture of regret and disbelief. You're really leaving, he said. Yes, I replied. Just not the way you imagined. At Emma's pickup, she ran toward me, smiling, unaware of the weight behind my calm. In the car, she asked if we were going on a trip. Just for a little while, I said. Somewhere peaceful. She accepted that easily. Children often do when they trust the person holding the wheel. That night, as we checked into a quiet hotel overlooking the city, I tucked her into bed and sat by the window alone. The skyline stretched out before me, familiar and distant at the same time. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Not because I had one, but because I had chosen myself without turning bitter. Walking away didn't mean running. It meant stepping forward without needing permission. And as the city lights flickered on below, I understood something with absolute clarity. I wasn't leaving with nothing. I was leaving with my dignity intact. Because when a woman walks away calmly, she takes her power with her. And that's the one thing no one can steal back. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded quietly, piece by piece, the way real consequences always do, without drama, without announcements, without anyone asking whether Nathan was ready for them. 3 days after Emma and I left, Nathan's firm made their decision official. What had started as temporary leave became an internal investigation. Not because of gossip, not because of personal morality, but because trust had been shaken in rooms where trust was currency. A man who hid a child, who lied with ease, was suddenly a liability. He called me when he got the email. I didn't think it would go this far, he said, his voice tight. They're questioning my judgment, my leadership. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, not out of anger, but clarity. This is what happens when people stop protecting your image, I replied. I'm not doing this to you. I just stopped absorbing it for you. There was silence on the line, then a quieter confession. They asked about Brooke. I already knew. Her transfer had become permanent. No promotion, no special role, just a polite relocation and a firm reminder about workplace boundaries. The future she thought a pregnancy would secure dissolved into a footnote no one wanted to discuss. "She thought you'd leave me," I said calmly. "You let her believe that." "I never promised. You promised without saying no," I interrupted. "That's still a promise." Nathan didn't argue. He couldn't. Socially, things shifted too. Invitations stopped. Friends became distant. People weren't cruel. They were cautious. The kind of caution reserved for men whose stories no longer matched their reputations. At the hotel, my life grew quieter. I worked during the day. I walked Emma to a nearby park in the evenings. We ordered simple dinners and watched movies curled up together. There was no chaos, no collapse, just the steady rebuilding of something honest. One afternoon, Emma looked up at me and said, "Daddy seems sad." I brushed her hair back gently. "Sometimes adults are sad because they made choices they can't fix." "Are we okay?" she asked. I smiled, real and unforced. "We are more than okay." Nathan lost what he valued most. Not his money, not his house, not his status. He lost control of the story. And without that, everything else began to fall into its proper place. Because consequences don't need revenge. They only need the truth to stand still long enough to do its work. Healing didn't arrive with relief. It arrived with silence. Not the heavy silence that follows loss, but a softer one. The kind that gives you space to hear your own thoughts again. In the hotel room, mornings became slower. Emma ate breakfast by the window, watching the city wake up, while I answered emails from clients who didn't know my life had split in two. And I didn't tell them. Not because I was hiding, but because I was learning something new. I didn't owe everyone the story of my pain. One afternoon, while Emma was at school, I walked into a small bookstore near the hotel. I wasn't looking for answers. I just wanted something solid to hold, something that didn't change its shape when things got difficult. I bought a slim paperback and read it that night while Emma slept beside me. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Strength didn't always look like fighting. Sometimes it looked like choosing calm when chaos was available. Nathan texted less. When he did, his messages were careful, measured, stripped of the confidence that once filled every sentence. He asked about Emma. He asked if I needed anything. I replied only when necessary, keeping my words neutral, my boundaries clear. There was no satisfaction in his discomfort, only distance. And distance, I learned, was healing. Emma adjusted faster than I expected. Children often do when they feel safe. She laughed more. She slept through the night. One evening, as we brushed our teeth side by side, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "You smile differently now." "How?" I asked. "Like you're not pretending," she replied. The honesty of it caught me off guard. I started taking long walks after dinner, letting the city lights blur into something beautiful instead of overwhelming. I breathed deeper. I slept without tension coiled in my chest. I noticed how my shoulders sat lower, how my thoughts no longer raced ahead to prepare for arguments that never came. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was quiet mornings, honest exhaustion, peace that didn't need witnesses. And in that quiet, I realized something important. I wasn't recovering from betrayal. I was recovering from forgetting myself. And as that version of me slowly returned, calmer, clearer, I'd more grounded, I understood that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the part where my life finally became my own again. Because healing doesn't announce itself. It settles in when you finally stop living on edge. Rebuilding didn't feel heroic. It felt practical. On Monday morning, after dropping Emma at school, I sat in the small workspace corner of our temporary apartment and opened my laptop. No assistants, no shared calendars, no one else's last name carrying weight in the background. Just me, a clean screen, and the question I'd avoided for years. What could I build on my own? I started with the people who had known my work before my marriage overshadowed it. Old clients, former collaborators. One email at a time, written carefully, without bitterness or explanation. I didn't mention my divorce. I didn't ask for sympathy. I simply reminded them who I was and what I could do. Most didn't respond. A few did. Then one afternoon, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. Caleb Ross. We'd worked together once, long before Nathan, on a branding project that never fully launched. Back then, Caleb had been blunt, demanding, and fair. He didn't waste time on excuses, and he respected people who showed up prepared. "I heard about the dinner," he said without preamble. "Not the gossip, the part where you stayed calm." I smiled despite myself. "That wasn't intentional." "It rarely is," he replied, "but it tells me something." He invited me to meet him the next day, strictly professional. No favors, no charity. Just an opportunity to pitch ideas for a redevelopment project his firm was taking on. I walked into that meeting alone. No introductions, no borrowed credibility. Just my work, my voice, and my experience, earned quietly over years of being underestimated. I spoke clearly. I didn't rush. I didn't try to impress. I focused on solutions, not validation. When I finished, Caleb leaned back in his chair and nodded once. "This is yours," he said, "if you want it." The contract wasn't massive, but it was real. Independent. Mine. That night, Emma danced around the living room when I told her mommy had a new job. "Does that mean we're staying?" she asked. "Yes," I said, pulling her into my arms. "We are." Rebuilding wasn't about proving Nathan wrong. It was about proving something to myself. I didn't need permission to start again. I just needed to begin. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something I had to survive. It felt like something I was allowed to shape. Because when a woman rebuilds from nothing, every brick belongs to her. The reward didn't arrive as a grand gesture. It showed up quietly, layered into the life I was rebuilding. The kind of reward that only becomes visible once you stop chasing it. Work settled into a rhythm. The project with Caleb expanded, then split into two. I found myself busy in a way that felt clean. No favors owed, no apologies required. I worked during school hours, closed my laptop before dinner, and learned how to say no without explaining myself. Emma noticed the change before I did. One evening, as we walked home from the park, she squeezed my hand and said, "You don't look tired anymore." I smiled. "That's because I'm not carrying things that don't belong to me." She nodded like she understood more than she should. Caleb became a steady presence, not intrusive, not rushed. He checked in about work, not my past. When conversations drifted into personal territory, it was never about what I'd survived, only about what I wanted next. That distinction mattered more than I expected. One night, after a late meeting, we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, papers spread between us. He looked at me thoughtfully and said, "You know, I didn't step in to save you." "I know," I replied. "You offered me work." "That's all I ever planned to offer," he said. "Everything else is a choice." The word lingered. Choice. It was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing until it returned. Weeks later, Nathan asked if we could talk. I agreed, in a public place on my terms. He looked different, humbled, careful, no longer certain of how he was perceived. He apologized, not dramatically, but sincerely. I accepted it without reopening anything. Forgiveness, I learned, didn't mean access. It meant closure. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked, "Are we happy now?" I kissed her forehead. "We are safe, and that's where happiness starts." Later, standing alone by the window, city lights stretching endlessly below, I felt something settle deep in my chest. I hadn't been rewarded with revenge. I had been rewarded with peace, stability, and the rare gift of being chosen. By work that respected me, by a man who saw me clearly, and most importantly, by myself. Because the best reward after betrayal isn't what you gain. It's what you no longer have to endure. I didn't see Nathan again for months, not because I was avoiding him, but because our lives had finally stopped intersecting in ways that mattered. When I did see him, and it was by accident, on a weekday afternoon in Manhattan, the kind of moment that feels unimportant until it isn't. I was leaving a meeting, my bag slung over my shoulder, my mind already moving to dinner plans with Emma. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed a familiar figure standing across the street, waiting for the light to change. Nathan. He looked thinner. Not sick, not broken, just worn down, like someone who had been forced to carry the full weight of his choices without anyone cushioning the fall. His suit was still expensive, but it didn't sit on him the same way. Confidence, I realized, had always been his best accessory. Our eyes met briefly. He recognized me instantly. I could see the reflexive urge to straighten, to reclaim whatever authority he thought he still had. But the moment passed. He didn't wave. He didn't approach. He simply nodded once, a small, restrained gesture that held more humility than any apology he'd ever offered. I nodded back. That was it. No confrontation. No words. No satisfaction drawn from his discomfort. And yet, as I walked away, I felt something settle into place. Something final. Later that evening, Caleb asked how my day had been as we cooked dinner together. Emma perched on a stool nearby, helping in her own careful way. I told him about the meeting. I didn't mention Nathan. I didn't need to. Karma, I learned, doesn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it works quietly, stripping away illusions one by one until a person is left with exactly what they earned. Nathan hadn't lost everything, but he had lost the version of himself that believed consequences were optional. A brook faded from the edges of our story entirely. No updates, no rumors, just absence. The kind that follows people who mistake leverage for love. Emma laughed as she set the table, humming to herself, safe in a world that no longer required me to be vigilant at all times. I watched her and felt a deep, unshakable certainty. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him to suffer. I needed my life to move forward without carrying his shadow, and it had. Karma had done its work without my involvement, without bitterness, without spectacle. All I had done was step out of the way. Because the most complete justice is a life so full that the past no longer asks to be remembered. The ending didn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It arrived on an ordinary morning, the kind I once thought I would never have again. Emma was eating cereal at the kitchen table, humming softly, her feet swinging under the chair. Sunlight filled the apartment we now called home. Not borrowed, not temporary, but ours. I watched her for a moment before she noticed me, and when she did, she smiled. Not the cautious smile of a child checking the weather of an adult's mood, but the easy kind, the safe kind. That was when I knew we had won. Not over Nathan, not over the past, over fear. Caleb came later that afternoon, carrying groceries, and an ease that no longer felt new, but still felt intentional. He never rushed us, never tried to insert himself into a story that wasn't his. He earned his place by showing up consistently, quietly, the way real commitment always does. That evening, after Emma went to bed, he took my hand and said, "I don't want to replace anything you lost, and I want to build what comes next, if you choose it." There was no grand speech, no pressure, just honesty. I said yes without hesitation, not because I needed saving, but because I finally trusted myself to choose wisely. Months later, we stood in a small garden surrounded by people who truly knew us. No spectacle, no performance. Emma walked ahead of me, scattering petals with serious concentration, proud of her role. When she looked back, her face lit up, and she gave me a small nod. Approval granted. I carried that moment with me. Nathan wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His chapter had closed quietly, exactly the way it deserved to. The life I had required no contrast to validate it. As I looked at the man beside me, I felt something deeper than happiness. I felt aligned, with my values, with my boundaries, and with the woman I had become. Later that night, Emma curled up between us on the couch and said, "Our house feels warm." I kissed her hair and smiled. It was. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. My story didn't end with exposure or revenge. It ended with stability, love, and a future that didn't require me to be on guard. And that was the most satisfying ending of all. Because when a woman chooses herself, life has a way of choosing her back, fully, Finally, and without conditions. And so, this story comes to a close. Now tell me, if you're still here with us at this moment, truly still here, then something in this story must have touched your heart in its own quiet way. Maybe it reminded you of a choice you're facing. Maybe it echoed a pain you've carried silently. Or maybe it simply made you pause and breathe a little deeper. What this story teaches us is simple, but not easy. We don't control what happens to us, but we always control how we respond. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Lauren didn't win because she exposed someone. She won because she chose dignity over chaos, clarity over rage, and peace over revenge. Another Stoic truth says, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Healing didn't come from humiliation or punishment. It came from boundaries, self-respect, and the courage to walk forward without dragging the past behind. If this story resonated with you, it's because real life works the same way. Quiet strength changes everything. Choosing yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. If you felt seen, understood, or comforted by this story, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, not just entertain. Thank you for staying until the end. You're not alone, and you never were. Before we end, we want to be clear about one important thing. This story is a work of fiction, created for storytelling, emotional reflection, and discussion. While it may feel real, and while many situations in this story are inspired by experiences people go through every day, the characters, events, and dialogue are not intended to represent real individuals or specific real-life cases. Any similarities are purely coincidental. The purpose of this content is not to present factual claims, accusations, or real-world allegations, but to explore human emotions, personal growth, accountability, and healing through narrative storytelling. Stories like this help us reflect on relationships, choices, and resilience in a safe, creative way. We encourage viewers to engage with this content as a dramatic narrative, not as news or personal testimony. Our goal is to inspire thoughtful conversation, empathy, and self-reflection. Never misinformation. Thank you for watching with an open heart and a clear understanding.